Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of Naturang Batas with Jemay Gatdula. I, of course, am Jemay Gatdula. The very first episode that we have will be dealing with the issue of state and church separation. What does it mean? Ano ba ibig sabihin ng konseptong ito? And does it mean if you're a politician or if you're a member of government that you're not supposed to be guided by your faith or religion? We are joined in this episode by some very special guests who will help us explain the concept in full. To my left is a friend of mine and law partner, Attorney Buboy David, who is also a lecturer on political law sa University of the East and University of Asian Pacific. And beside him is a well-known writer and political economist, David Rosario. Well, so Buboy, ano ba talaga ibig sabihin ng church and state separation?
Unang-una, gusto ko muna akong bumati at magpasalamat sa inyo, Attorney Jemay, for inviting me. So going back to your question, ano nga ba talaga ang prinsipyo ng separation of church and state? Medyo malalim po to dahil ito'y matitrace back natin since time immemorial. Kung maalala nyo po sa ating pong Panginoon, kay Hesus Kristo, sabihin niya, render it to what
to
is
Caesar,
yes,
and render to God what is to God's. Yeah.
Exactly. So, ganun po, doon po nag-umpisa na ang ibig sabihin kailangan po magkaroon ng pagkakahiwalay ang Estado at ang simbahan. Pero ang katanungan ko po sa inyo, kailangan ho bang talagang hiwalay o may kailangan kooperasyon?
Pag sinabi ko separation of church and state, it actually means, or people are actually talking of two things. One is yung non-establishment, and the other is yung principle of non-discrimination. Could you please explain yung dalawang yon?
Okay. Ang non-establishment clause, ang ibig sabihin lang po dito, ang gobyerno hindi siya pwedeng mag-establish ng sariling reliyon. So, kailangan po
kumbaga walang state religion.
No state religion, at hindi po siya pwedeng magbigay ng
usually yung pag sinabing hindi pwedeng mag-state ng religion, it comes in several forms, I think. Yung hindi siya pwede magbigay ng preferential sa taxes, or pwede niyang sabihin na pag may forum or may government function, ito yung parang gagawin nilang religion na gagamitin for that particular function. Or in any other manner, like for example, I think sa eskwela, magkakaroon ng religion do sa particular classroom na yon or the such. The other one is yung non-discrimination. And that essentially means
ibig sabihin nga po, hindi lang pwede ang napumili ang Estado ng isang reliyon dahil ginagarantiya po ng Constitution natin na there will be a freedom of exercise of religion.
Or pantay-pantay kasi mga religion. There have been several cases na that we've had sa Supreme Court on this one. One of them is yung American Bible Society, which I believe allowed yung believers to be able to distribute Bibles and without any shall we say parang paghinder by means of taxes and the like. And the other one is yung sa Austria versus NLRC, which essentially said that the government cannot interfere pag mayroong mga bagay na essentially within the complete matters ng religion. Like for example, yung pagpili ng head, kung ano ba yung seremonya sa gusto nilang gawin, dapat yung gobyerno medyo step back or wag makialam sa mga bagay na ito. Pero pag sinabi ba na may separation of church and state, does it mean na yung tao, yung Pilipino, ay hindi na pwedeng i-profess yung faith niya? Lalo-lalo na kung siya, for example, ay nakikipag-usap sa mga forum na katulad ng ganito, or for example, kahit sa classroom na pag may nagdedebate.
Yun nga po, Attorney Jemay, our Constitution guarantees na there will be a freedom of exercise of religion. Kasama po dyan, yung sinabi nyo kaninang kaso, yung pagbibigay ng ekspresyon ng iyong paniniwala sa Diyos.
Yung pag sinabi ng pag-proselytize.
Yes.
Okay. Na pwedeng i-express nila yung kanilang faith.
Ngayon, if I can elaborate on that, kasi dun sa kasong yon, ang gobyerno po natin ay binibigyan niya ng pinapatungan niya ng karapatang tax ang pag-exercise ng ganong freedom. That's why, ang sabi na po ng Constitution natin, that's another way of prohibiting the free exercise of religion. Kaya po, hindi siya pwede.
Saan ba nanggaling itong itong concept of separation in church and state? David, in your readings, what did you think came it about? Si Bubi kasi mentioned yung sinabi ni Jesus regarding render unto Caesars. But how has this doctrine of separation of church and state been fleshed out through the centuries?
Well, before I begin, good day to you and thank you for having me. The way I see it, yung simula nito is really later on, nung time na ni Constantine. Because for those of us who are not familiar with it, si Constantine, what he did was, nung nag-convert siya sa isang reliyon, sa Christianity, ginawa niya is yung he tried to enact this religion to make it seem it seemed as though yung pamahalaan niya was really one which was in unison with the church. So nagmukhang yung estado is being dictated upon by the church, and this was seen as something negative by other people.
I think what happened there is that since Constantine kasi in a way converted to Christianity, it became a double-edged thing. Number one, it did certainly help in sa pag-spread ng Christianity, but at the same time, it did give a little bit sour taste in the mouth. Kasi ang nangyari tuloy, parang, yun nga, yung sinabi mo, ang nagdidikta tuloy ng estado, yung relihiyon, which some people believe hindi nakakabuti. Ano ba yung ayaw ng mga tao sa pagkailam o pag-intrude ng religion sa state? Ano sa tingin mo? Ano opinion mo?
Well, for me kasi I can relate it better to another example. We have also the example for example sa England nung time ni Henry VIII na gumawa siya ng sarili niyang relihiyon and in-incorporate niya to sa gobyerno, sa pamahalaan niya, and we can see that yung relihiyon niya, it was used as a means na parang i-control yung mga tao, kumbaga pinolitikan niya ang relihiyon.
So pero again, just to ano masama doon? Kung ang reliyon kasi is mabuti para sa tao, ano ang masama ng having yung religion actually nagdidikta sa the way magpatakbo yung estado?
Yung problem kasi dyan is not na, for example, yung religyoso ako, nandun ako sa gobyerno, tapos yung mga decision ko is in accordance with my faith. There's really nothing, well, in my opinion, nothing wrong with that. For me, what seems wrong is if you're using religion as a means to, for example, you want a certain government thing to happen, and you're riding on the credibility of religion, and you're using it as a means na to really get people to say no, this is right, because it's
kumbaga parang nagkakaroon ng concentration ng power in that particular
exactly.
You were talking about Henry VIII. What happened there ba? So what he did was he essentially established himself as the head of the church.
The head of the church in England. What happened there was, he in a way persecuted all the other religions. He favored his own religion, which he created, and he wanted everyone to follow that. Yung naging masamang effect nito is, well, yung mga Katoliko were forced to find a refuge, which they eventually found in America. Kaya sila napunta doon. It was partly to escape the persecution being done in England.
Well, we'll continue this in a bit. We'll be talking about how the concept got wrong. But one thing I'd like to notice in the time we have for this segment is that, don't you find it ironic na people use yung concept of separation in church and state to argue against the Catholic Church, when actually, when we look at history, it was actually the Catholic Church which developed and refined yung concept of separation in church and state. And the one who probably could be credited with that refinement is none other than Saint Augustine, which I'll ask you about when we come back after this break. So thank you very much. I'll see you in a bit. Okay, welcome back. So we were discussing yung concept of separation of church and state. We discovered na ang ibig sabihin niya walang pinapalingan na relihiyon ang gobyerno, pero hindi rin ibig sabihin na dapat i-prohibit ang mga tao na i-practice sila ang kanyang religion even in public life. Now, as I said, one of the ironic things about the concept of separation in church and state is that it has been always argued against the Catholic Church, when the concept was refined by none other than one of the greatest saints that we've had, which is Saint Augustine. Why, David? What did Saint Augustine actually say about this concept?
Well, yung kay Saint Augustine, what he was trying to say is, or what he was trying to emphasize is, he called it city of God. What he's trying to show is that there's a city of God, and there's also our cities, our normal cities, our natural cities. This, in a way, kumbaga, kung napapansin mo, it relates rin sa sinabi ni Jesus na render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and render unto God which is God's. We have to be conscious of this distinction in a way na yun, there is yung kingdom of God, and there's also an earthly kingdom.
But it does not mean na just because sinabi na may earthly kingdom and there's this heavenly kingdom, yung sinabi nga ni City of God, na sinabi ni Saint Augustine, hindi niya sinasabi actually na yung mga tao libre or free to do what they want kasi they believe na it's going to be in accordance with their faith. And I think ang dapat pa rin gawin is, as I think also taught to us in the Bible or in the scriptures, is that may duty rin tayo na sumunod sa ating gobyerno, lalong-lalo na kung yung mga batas niya isang ayon sa tinatawag nating natural law. We'll be discussing natural law in a different episode, but in essence, that is essentially what is St. Augustine coming to. Now, Buboy, yung Bill of Rights natin, particularly Article 3 that you mentioned with regard to the non-establishment clause and the non-discrimination, this, as we know, came from the American Constitution. Could you tell us a background on what happened and why is it that we had this provision that was handed down to us from the Americans? Ano ba yung background or history nito?
Gaya nga ng sabi natin kanina, iniiwasan lang po, magkaroon nga ng isang reliyon ang gobyerno. Ayaw kasi nila, well, it came from, yun nga, nangyari way back sa London, sa England, and then it was transferred in the US, na ang nangyayari nga is, ginagamit ang reliyon ng Estado para sa pagkontrol sa mga tao. Which is, hindi maganda rin ng dahil nga, nagagarantiya tayo ng free exercise ng sarili mong paniniwala sa Diyos.
Well, and ang isa pang interesting thing, lalo na nung nagbabasa tayo about this topic, is that nung unang ginagawa ng Amerika, yung kanilang constitution, and they came up with later on yung kinatawag na First Amendment, which is yung right to religion. Isang thing na na-discover ko is that the reason why they set up yung non-establishment clause, the reason why they set up the fact na kailangan walang religion yung United States, is because of the fact that they do not want to trample on the state rights. Because each and every state daw, nung panahon ng American Revolution, may kanya-kanya ng state religion na fina-fund mismo ng state at the state level. And that is why they did not want to set up a United States church, is for the purpose kasi na ayaw ng pakilaman yung religion at the state level. So I think bottom line, ang picture na nakukuha natin sa usapan na to is that we do not interpret yung separation of church and state na hindi natin pwedeng i-practice yung religion or dapat nating ihiwalay ang religion sa usapang pampubliko. Kumbaga, dapat pa rin makihalo or mag-participate ang ating paniniwala or kung ano may faith natin in our public lives or public discussions. And I think that's very clear so far. But now the question is, how come people have this vastly different interpretation of the concept of separation in church and state? And in my reading so far, I think one person that has been heavily blamed for this is the President John Kennedy of the United States. Why? What happened ba with John Kennedy? Can anybody please tell us with that?
With Kennedy kasi based on what is out there, when he was running for president in
and he was the first realistic Catholic
he was.
Candidate for president.
What was being questioned about him was that, will your religion affect the way you run this country? Makakagulo ba ang pagiging Katoliko mo? And so he made a speech and he said, I am a Catholic, I am a Christian, but this will not affect my judgment when I am elected into office. And so he was elected into office and he's become one of the most famous US presidents. Now, sa ngayon or after him, we now have this idea of people actually um, trying to imitate him in a way and say na ako rin, pag nandyan na ako sa posisyon, hindi makakagulo ang pagiging katoliko ko sa sa governance ko of the country of my local area.
And I think as one top politician once said, diba, hindi lang siya president for the Catholics, but president siya for all people of all religions. But is that reasoning really correct? Is that reasoning ni Kennedy valid?
If I may add, kasi curiously, no, if you will follow their way of thinking, ang upbringing din nila is being a Catholic. So, paano mo masiset aside yung being a Catholic mo and doing a judgment call for your politics? So, curiously, kung paano nila masiseparate talaga ang ganong klaseng way of thinking. So, I might ask you this. So, let's say if you'll be the next president of the Philippines, and I know you're a devout Catholic, how can you lead the country by saying now you are now relinquishing yourself of your Catholic values? What can you say, Attorney Gemma?
Well, that's it. And I think I would like to point out kay Bishop Charles Chaput, which I'd like you to expound on. Pero yun nga, as David was saying earlier, Kennedy said that he will rule or govern according to his judgment. The problem is, what is shaping yung judgment niya? And as to your question to me, di ba? Most likely I will tell you that I will govern according to my conscience. But then the question becomes is, sino naman nag-govern or nag-shape or nagfo-form ng aking konsyensya, if not for my own religion or for my own set of beliefs? But I think one of the best ways to answer this is yung nga, kay Charles Chaput. What did Bishop Chaput say in response to Kennedy's speech?
Well, basically what he was trying to say was that yun nga, you cannot fully separate it, yung pagiging Katoliko and or whatever religion for that matter, because as Attorney Buboy was pointing out, it's the way you were brought up. Kumbaga bata ka pa lang, yun na yung paniniwala mo, naka-influensya siya sa buhay mo, lumaki ka, yun na rin yung mga iniisip mo na yun yung basihan mo kung ba't mo ginagawa to yung para sa akin tama, ganun ako pinalaki. So, pagpunta mo na dun sa politika, it's really not so simple.
Siya yung para magiging guide or compass mo.
Correct.
And that's true. Kasi when, for example, politicians say rule of law, or they use the words justice or fairness, anong ibig sabihin ng justice or fairness? Saan sila makakakuha ng standard or basis or framework? Kundi kung saan yung, as you say, kung saan sila lumaki, saan sila, sino ba nag-form sa kanila, and the like. Pero, one danger nga lang na some people say, but I don't know if you agree with this, is that by relying on your beliefs or religion, would it make you therefore discriminate against people of other religions tuloy? What do you think about that?
Maybe not, because yun nga, because you have may sarili kang paniniwala rin na, but this doesn't mean that you're now trampling other people's beliefs.
Because even the Catholic Church itself would be the one to tell you na to have respect and tolerance for other people's beliefs. But at the same time, David, if for example, going back to that Kennedy question, what if the Pope nga said na I want you to rule in this way, and you as a Catholic, and assuming you're the president, would you be saying therefore that you should be following a foreign power, like for example the Pope, when you're governing as president for the Philippines?
For me, well,
first of all, I think the answer is I don't think the Pope will ever say that.
That's true. But hypothetically, if he did, well, of course, you being a Catholic, you have to take it into consideration. But ultimately, well, there's a reason why you said the Pope will never do that, because it infringes upon already the sovereignty.
Because in essence, what the Pope will be essentially telling you will be something on how to guide yung conscience mo, but not necessarily on how for you to conduct yung public affairs or public policy. In the same way, for example, when the Pope issued yung Caritas and Veritate, some people read it as a public policy statement, when actually it is not. It is more or less a statement on how to approach public policy in the spirit of charity. So that's it. I think ang interesting thing sa discussion na to is that we've discussed ano ba yung concept ng separation of church and state, and then why is it that how President Kennedy was able to, in a way, mislead a lot of people into believing that the separation of church and state concept is different from it actually is. In the next portion of our show, we'll be essentially discussing how is the concept of religion should be played out properly in our public lives, not only actually public lives, but in private lives as well. And particularly in all the issues that we've had confronting the Philippines, particularly, of course, yung sa contraception and the issues of divorce and same-sex marriage. We'll be right back. Hope you'll join us then. So welcome back. So we've discussed yung history ng church and state separation. We've discussed yung concept niya, and why is it that people now has this mistaken understanding of separation of church and state. But now that we've more or less understood what it actually means, ano bang application ng concept na to in our public lives? How can we responsibly practice yung religion natin, either as a politician or as a simple businessman or even as a private citizen? There are several issues that are confronting us right now that heavily involved in discussions natin relating to our faith. Obviously, yung sa contraception is one, and then yung sa divorce, which is probably going to crop in, and then yung sa issue na medyo more or less tricky, which is yung same-sex marriage. Buboy, the first question I'd like to ask is it fair, for example, for a congressman, when faced with a question regarding contraception, to actually argue from the perspective of his faith? Would that essentially be discriminating against people from other religions? Or would that be essentially having a Catholic, for example, impose yung beliefs niya on non-Catholics?
Actually, Jeremiah, that's very tricky, you know. Kasi as a representative of the people, so kailangan he should be acting to represent his constituents. It will be a public policy. But then, if he will now follow his conscience, so now he's exercising his own religion.
Sets of beliefs,
yes,
and philosophies.
And which is guaranteed by the Constitution also. So, parang may tension, no? So, but then, ang ultimately nga, yun ang pinag-uusapan natin is, ultimately, you will be guided by your own conscience, by your own background. So, set of values.
Pero yung sinasabi nila na parang, you shouldn't impose yung faith mo on others. You shouldn't make a law that will be essentially be an imposition of a morality, on one set of morality, on the morality of others. What do you say to that?
Well, for me naman kasi, they're not imposing or opposing these laws just solely because it's a religious matter or that's what their beliefs say. It's also because they find certain logic to it. I think the problem here, sometimes we perceive that because automatically a Christian or someone that's from another religion, we automatically assume na it's because of their religion. We don't really look at yung kumbaga yung logic ng mga argument nila. We already dismiss it as hindi kasi yun yung religion niya, yun na yun. But the truth is, we have to look naman at the merits of their arguments, because if they have good arguments to back their claims, then it's sure it could be guided by religion, but it's not because religion dictates, but it's because their logic, their upbringing, all of these factors play the role.
And I think it's a mali na sabihin na bakit kailangang i-impose mo yung moralidad mo sa iba. Because pag tinignan mo talaga, di ba, Buboy, lahat naman ng batas may kanya-kanya moralidad eh. Ang tanong na lang is kung ano yung moralidad na ilalagay mo doon sa batas na yon. Pag sinabi kasi na dapat magkaroon tayo ng batas na walang moralidad, essentially, yung batas na yon may kanyang klaseng moralidad na. Yung moralidad na walang moralidad. Di ba? Parang it's a morality actually, na having no morality. So having a law with no morals is essentially morality din.
Pero Chama, if you'll remember, our Constitution provides, no, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Ibig sabihin din, ang gobyerno, hindi rin siya pwedeng mag-impose ng kanyang paniniwala na kung anong dapat na maging reliyon. Hindi ba? So, now, what comes into my mind now is, ngayon, currently, the government is sponsoring these RH bills. So, how can you justify this? Because they usually accuse, no? The church is encroaching upon the state. But how about now, the state now is sponsoring such bills. Now, it encroaches upon the morality or the teachings of the church.
Which is true, actually. And I think one of the arguments nga na has been forwarded about this is that kasi ang ina-accuse palagi yung Catholic Church is that bakit kayo nakikialam sa kama ng mga ibang tao. Pero actually, baliktad when you think about it. Because in order, for example, yung sa RH bill to be made effective, they would need a budget.
Yeah.
And that budget is actually taken from yung mga taxpayers' money. And these taxpayers are actually Catholics. So in essence, ang ginagawa ng gobyerno, if they pass the RH bill, is that they're forcing Catholics to actually pay for a measure na alam nilang against sa kanilang paniniwala. Yes. Which I believe is, and yan tama si Buboy, they're being actually made to violate their own faith by having that law. The other thing that I'd like to ask is that, like for example, if you get to be made a public official, again, going back to that issue, let's say naging mayor ka or naging presidente ka, does it really mean ba talaga na you will have to leave your faith at the door? Or kailangan mong iwanan yung paniniwala mo?
No, because quite frankly, I don't think anyone naman, pag nahalal ka, you can't just automatically leave your faith. It's not just something for Christians, but for all other religions as well. Because yun nga, as was being pointed out a while ago, this is what you grew up with. Bata ka pa lang, ito na yung mga idea na that you grew up with, na reinforce sa'yo. And it's not just in the Catholic faith, but all other religions. So, it's really impossible for someone to become elected and just drop, more than 30 or 40 years of his upbringing suddenly out of the blue. It's really such an impossible task.
And I think, di ba, Buboy, the funny thing is that every time, for example, a politician, yung mga nahalal, when they take their oath of office, what they do is essentially, they invoke God. Diba, every time they take their oaths of office, they put their hand in the Bible or Quran or what have you, and they essentially invoke yung tulong ng Diyos.
So
like
help me God. Diba?
Help me God, like yung sinabi, for example, ni President Aquino nung nahalal siya. And to say, for example, na yung gobyerno dapat wag masyadong magpapaniniwala sa relihiyon is actually wrong. Kasi, correct me if I'm wrong, pero yung constitution natin is punong-puno ng mga references sa relihiyon. In fact, yung preamble pa lang, ang pinakaunang hirit agad ng constitution natin sa preamble is
we the Philippines,
imploring the aid of Almighty God.
No?
So I think there's really a huge amount of room for that faith should play in our public lives and in our because I think one of the things that will happen is kung tama nga ba yung interpretasyon ng ibang tao, magkakaroon katuloy ng parang schizophrenic na public official. Pupunta siya ng misa sa linggo, pero pagdating na sa Monday to Friday, yung mga pinagagawa niya, walang connection sa pinagdadasal niya nung linggo, which I think is wrong. During the break, I think we were talking about certain public officials na alam natin na very much in tune sa kanilang faith. And I think one of the best one that we could look at is yung patron saint of lawyers and I think public officials.
Thomas More.
And that's Thomas More. Could you please tell us more about him?
Well, yung kay Thomas More, back in the time of King Henry VIII sa England, si King Henry, he wanted to make his own religion. Yung argument niya for this is because hindi siya pinayagan mag-divorce. So, naisipan niya, gumawa lang siya ng sariling religion sa England, which will allow him to divorce. Now, si Thomas More, a devout Catholic, who was also a good follower of the king, inisip niya muna, inisip niya kung tama ba itong ginagawa ng king, inaral niya talaga. And in the
kumbaga, hindi naman siya nag-disobey agad because of the fact na gusto lang niya, ayaw lang niya sumunod sa king. Pero kumbaga, pinag-aralan talaga niya, kung ma-harmonize ba niya yung paniniwala niya sa Diyos, pero at the same time, yung batas sa kailangan niya sundin.
So, what he was trying the conclusion he came to is that he ended up following the moral, the natural law, the law of God, because he found more merit to it. It had better logic for him. it made more sense. It's not because ayaw niya sa king, ayaw niya sa rule of law, ayaw niya doon. It's because through his own study, napansin niya na, teka, may mali dito. So that's essentially it.
There are other public officials in recent times na very large yung role ng faith sa public lives nila. I think some of them would be sila Tony Blair. Of course, obviously si Gandhi is one of those. Tony Blair even, I think, converted from another religion and then became a Catholic in recent times. And the interesting thing about it is that when we look especially at the United States, faith at saka yung that role that religion plays is playing a huge part in their public policy discussions. You have sila Robert George, and I think yung mga presidential candidates that are coming up for the next round of US elections are all espousing yung credentials sila as far as faith is concerned. Although I have one question, and you as a lawyer, you as a political economist, do you think it is justified for a private citizen, kung merong batas dyan na sa tingin niya laban talaga sa kanyang paniniwala, na wag sumunod sa batas na yon? I think ito yung tinatawag na civil disobedience, which Gandhi espoused. Sila Martin Luther King was also espousing, especially yung sa racial discrimination ng panahon na yon. Ano masasabi niyo tungkol dito? David?
Well, for me, not out of the blue. It can't be ayoko yung batas, ayoko niyan, basta ayoko. Bakit? Wala lang, gusto ko.
Parang text sa cellphone.
Ganun lang.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to first understand that these laws were made with a certain logic in mind. Now, if we can prove that this certain logic is actually flawed, mali siya, hindi siya nakakabuti sa atin, and perhaps we can look at other options. Pero yung tipong papasok na lang tayo, sasabihin natin, hindi, mali yan, and we
kasi
won't
type mo lang na wag sumunod.
Type mo lang
So
dito.
essentially what you're saying is that as long as there has been proper discernment, long periods of study, and if in the end yung konsyensya mo talaga ay hindi talaga ma-take na sumunod sa batas na yon, then I believe that in that particular instance, civil disobedience could be employed. Although I must say that just because, for example, the citizens did employ civil disobedience, it does not mean that they will be exempt from the penalties that the law will impose. But I think that's the price to be paid for standing up for your faith. I think people has to also remember yung first, I think all the first apostles, except I think for John, were all martyred. And I think for all the first popes yata, I believe, are also all martyred. So I think it shows kung how much yung price that is necessary for us to defend yung faith. So that's it. I hope that this episode has been quite helpful in discussing the concept of separation of church and state. I think, as one of our favorite saints mentioned, it's foolish to think that you can leave your Catholicism at the door as if it were a hat or a coat every time you enter university or Congress. And I think the rule still stands. I actually believe that, and I think you guys will agree, if we want a better Philippines, I think the only thing we have to do is that for Catholics to be better Catholics, for Muslims to be better Muslims, and for all the people to actually live by the faith that they actually espouse. I think that by that simple act alone, we will have a better country for ourselves. Well, that's it. Any parting remarks, Buboy?
Well, again, thank you, Jemai, for inviting me.
No, it's my pleasure.
And we hope we have contributed, in our own opinion, a fulfilling message that it's not really actually a separation of church and state, because you just, as you said, you just cannot leave it at the footsteps of the door, yung belief mo and your faith. So live your faith, and thank you, Jemai.
Okay, David.
Well, once again, thank you as well for having me. I guess as a parting message, all I can say is, yung the whoever we may be, individuals, public officials, students, what have you, at the end of the day, we have our beliefs, and these beliefs will guide us. And it is wrong to actually just think that it is so easy to discard it and just leave it at the door. So yeah, hope it helps.
Well, in the coming weeks, we'll have very interesting episodes as well. Hopefully, this has been helpful to you. Next episode will be on natural law. Ano ba yung ibig sabihin ng natural law? Ibig sabihin ba nito na porke hindi ka Katoliko, pwede kang hindi sumunod sa natural law? At Ibig sabihin ba na porke may natural law, does that mean na hindi dapat tayo magkaroon ng contraception? All such other issues we'll be discussing next week, and I hope that you can join us again that time. So this is Jemay Gatdula for Naturang Batas, and I hope to see you again soon. Thank you very much, and good day to all.